What's happening, guys? This is Logan Robinson from Hear the Spear, presenting to you by NoleGameday.com. We're here live on a wonderful, fantastic Wednesday afternoon, and it's just me and D-Lou on the show for you guys this weekend. Austin dealing with a little bit of a sickness, but we're here.
Sick of recruiting.
He is sick of recruiting. He saw the entire docket for the production sheet for this week's show, saw about 95% of it is all recruiting talk, so he's on sick leave for this week's show. But we've got a lot to go through, including talking about a 5-star projected to land with Florida State on the defensive side of the ball. We'll begin that show here in just a second, talking about that. And then Florida State racking up a handful of commitments. We're going to run through each one of those, including a defensive lineman. There's been some chatter, some concern. Terrence Knighton's squad not able to get on the recruiting trail and grabbing guys. Well, he kind of shushed some people up a little bit, and we're going to go through some of those. Florida State also did land a really speedy wide receiver and a 4-star. And then the Seminoles did lose some commitments in the 2027 class, and we're going to talk about some quarterback recruiting for Florida State as well near the end of the show. And then a really cool and fun video here of a 5-time Pro Bowl tackle talking about Jared Verse and mentioning one of the reasonings of why he retired was facing Jared Verse. But with me is Dustin Lewis, our editor-in-chief at NoleGameday.com. How we doing, D-Lou? It's just you and I, baby.
It's great to be back, and yeah, these end up being the best shows, so I guess we'll take it today on this beautiful Wednesday. But yeah, Florida State building a little bit of momentum on the recruiting trail as we get into the second half here of June. Official visits continuing in Tallahassee, and I think we're at 5 commitments since last Sunday for the Seminoles. So building up that Tribe 26 class, and it was down there probably about number 32, number 33 in the country or so, dwindling a little bit. And then now, I haven't checked it today, but at least as of last night, had risen back up to number 19 in the country. And, as we'll get into in a couple minutes, still generating some momentum and the possibility to add some elite guys here over these next couple of weeks.
Yep. Before we get started, if you're on YouTube right now, smack that like button. And if you have any topics or questions you want us to go over, we'll bring it up here on the screen below, and we will get to a majority of those. But if you're listening on iTunes, Google Play, make sure you're subscribed over there on the audio platforms if you want to listen to us in the car, at the gym, something easy that's accessible to you. We're also on the audio platforms. But let's get started. 5-star, a 5-star has been projected to go to the Seminoles. Some good news here, hopefully, in the coming, we don't know how long here, but Florida State.
We know.
We know? Oh, we got the date?
Yeah, Chauncey Kennan actually has set an announcement date for July 6th. And right now, he's got 6 contenders in his recruitment: Florida State, Florida, Miami, Georgia, LSU, and Oregon. Has visited some of those programs over the last couple of weeks, was at Florida State for his official visit this past weekend. And, the Seminoles seem to be trending here to keep one of the top players in the state of Florida home, which I think would be a big development for Florida State because obviously, and, we've seen it happen to Florida and Miami as well, but some of the top recruits in the Sunshine State, a lot of them have gone out of state in recent years to play for whether it's Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, and Florida State obviously wants to keep these guys closer to home, and they got a real good chance here with Chauncey Kennan.
That's right here by me out of Booker High School in Sarasota, Florida. His stats, well, he's also he can play both offense and defense, but definitely in the college level going to be on the defensive side of the ball. But some stats here: 10 reception, 317 yards, 6 touchdowns on offense. He also had 33 tackles, 16 pass breakups, and 1 interception on the defensive side of the ball. He's 6'1", 175 pounds. I don't know if you had mentioned it there, but a ton of offers across the entirety of the country: LSU, Georgia, Miami, Florida, Michigan, Tennessee, Texas. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say it just continues to roll. I feel like for Coach Surtain, it's been this way, though, for a long time for Florida State in the defensive backfield. And they always find momentum. They always find positives. And this one would be big, but this was from On3 still Steve Wiltfong putting in a expert prediction for Chauncey Kennan to land with the Florida State Seminoles, which would be a big grab for FSU and Mike Norvell and Tony White too.
Yep, and obviously, a couple weeks out from that July 6th planned announcement for Chauncey Kennan, but I will at the same time, sometimes these announcements get moved up. A guy who we're about to talk about in a couple minutes, Tico Crittenden Jr. Was supposed to announce in July, and then obviously decided to go off the board a little bit unexpectedly last night and go ahead and go public with his pledge to Florida State. So we'll see if Chauncey Kennan decides to wait until that July 6th date, or if he goes ahead and maybe makes an announcement a little bit sooner rather than later. But either way, I mean, you've got to feel good about where Florida State sits in this recruitment at the moment. And, as you mentioned, Patrick Surtain Sr. has done a very good job on the recruiting trail since arriving in Tallahassee. And, you think about him landing Charles Lester a couple of cycles ago, who was a 5-star prospect at that time, finished as a 4-star guy.
He's got a chance area too.
Yeah, that is true. He's got a chance to do it again with Chauncey Kennan, who is currently a 5-star on 247 Sports. I believe he's a composite 4-star, but either way, very talented top 100 prospect who brings size, athleticism, and a lot of talent if he does decide to commit to Florida State.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were just mentioning him here, but let's talk about some good news. I don't know if you could say it's concrete good news, because at the end of the day, it's still recruiting. And this day and age of college football, as we were talking about in the production meeting before we went live, it is very hard to, seal things down with definitely recruits. It's always been that way a little bit, but now with NIL game all across the board, not only in recruiting in high school, but also too in the transfer portal, it's very hard to hold on to guys. But Florida State, though, getting some good news in the defensive line for Terrence Knighton with Tico Crittenden Jr. committing to Florida State, a 4-star defensive lineman. He chose the Seminoles over Tennessee, Georgia, and Texas Tech. He just recently had the official visit over the weekend, and then last night made that commitment. What are your thoughts on this pickup for Florida State? And, I know I was mentioning earlier the conversation about Terrence Knighton and, them, it's just FSU Twitter at the end of the day, but they are pressing hard on Knighton to get the recruiting up. And as always, it's kind of been a little stale-ish there in the defensive line recruitment department going back and, with Odell Hagens. And there's always been a little bit of a concern there on the recruiting trail at times and bringing in talent, bringing in guys that can be game changers, game wreckers for you on the interior of the defensive line. But here we go, starting to build up some momentum for Knighton and his first year with the Florida State Seminoles.
Yeah, work in silence and let success bring the noise. And I think that's what Terrence Knighton has done here over the last week, adding 3 defensive line pledges in this Tribe 26 class. And, you go back to last weekend where they were able to land Whitley Cadeau. And then now coming in here, you get Tico Crittenden Jr., as well as James Carrington, who is nicknamed Tank. So, I mean, quickly we've seen that. Yeah, we've seen that that interior defensive line kind of stack up here in Tribe 26. Still want to see some defensive ends get on the board, but either way, I think you've got to like the way that it's trending at the moment. You get a guy in Tico Crittenden Jr., who, as you mentioned, was coveted by multiple high-level SEC programs as well as Texas Tech. Florida State gets him in Tallahassee over the weekend, and they're able to seal the deal on this recruitment. Just offered him back in March, so they've been steadily building that relationship out. It seemed like they had a pretty good plan for his future and his development once he arrives at Florida State, and we're able to land this one ahead of, I can't remember exactly where he was supposed to visit this weekend, but he canceled an official visit, went ahead and locked things down with Florida State last night.
I was going to say, when you mentioned Texas Tech, those people are throwing money. We're talking serious, ridiculous money. We're going to see if it is going to pan out, and they're going to get their ROI in this upcoming season for them. But Texas Tech, when you're dealing with that, and of course, when you're dealing with schools like Georgia and Tennessee, those aren't no joke either, just because of their play on the field and coaching and caliber, sending guys in the NFL, but also too, when it comes down to money, NIL games. So this was an impressive pickup here for Terrence Knighton. He's 6'4", 300 pounds. I mean, that's a good size for a defensive lineman at his age. His stats coming from his junior season: 25 tackles, 15 tackles for loss. Sign me up for that. 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles. He had 2+ tackles for loss in every game, including 4 tackles for loss and 2 forced fumbles, and a 42-0 win versus Northview. But you got to like, one thing, and he's still very early in his career, D-Lou, and for Knighton, very early in his career. But some good things that we've heard, though, is developing and getting guys year by year, increasing their play and their productivity. And whenever you bring in kind of these guys that, are already built really nicely, it feels like, and there's a strong chance that, he can be developed and improved, you feel good about pickups like this. So maybe that shushes up FSU Twitter for maybe a week. I give that a week.
At least for now. Now they got to go out and land a defensive end. But, Tico Crittenden Jr. brings a lot of physicality. Like you said, really like his frame, long arms, some decent athleticism there as well. So, he should be fun to watch, if he does get to Florida State, and we'll see how he begins to develop early in his career. Got to get through that early signing period in December, though. So that'll be something to watch here. Not sure if you mentioned it, Logan, but Crittenden Jr. rated as the number 336 overall prospect, the number 40 defensive lineman, and the number 42 recruit in Georgia in that 2026 class, according to the 247 composite rating. So really nice pickup for Florida State. And like we said, it just continues that trend that we've seen over the last 10 days or so.
Too, and when you were mentioning the edge rushing position, I think it's going to play a big part, at least recruiting wise, on how play does this upcoming season for guys like James Williams. And we'll see what happens to, a lot of this younger group that they brought in this last year's class as well, seeing how well they can excel on the field for Florida State, I think can play a pivotal role on what they're going to do recruiting wise. I mean, it's plain and simple at the end of the day, but still, that's something that if they can see James Williams take that next big step that they're really, really, really hoping for, and that's a lot of pressure on James Williams too this upcoming season as we get closer into this year. But yeah, you got to take care of your trenches though, as always. And too, I mean, if you look at Braden Fisk, what he did, and I know Odell Higgins is no longer your coach, but he's still hands on as we're expecting. And then two, look at what we're going to talk about at the end of the show, Jared Verse. I mean, those kind of things should be able to help you on the recruiting trail at some point, right? It's got to. But then got to have a bag as well, I guess.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if Jared Verse wins Defensive Rookie of the Year or potentially eventually wins Defensive Player of the Year. Still got to have a bag, I guess. Let's keep moving, though, D-Lou. We've got another commitment. This one's coming from a brother of the Florida State defensive side of the ball, and this is Caleb Avale's brother, Noah, a 3-star linebacker. He commits to Florida State. He had offers from Ole Miss, North Carolina, which his brother was previously playing for, Georgia Tech, and Michigan State. Also had some other offers from there. But what are your thoughts on this? Of course, we haven't seen Caleb Lavale play yet in a Florida State uniform. The most time that we actually got to see him play was in a bowl game last year. But what's your thoughts on the pickup here? Is it just because the brother's here playing over here, or is there some upside where you feel like there could be some development there under John Papuchis, Florida State's new linebackers coach?
Yeah, I think this is a high floor pickup for Florida State. Noah Laval, maybe not the highest rated prospect. I know a lot of people are going to point out to his 247 rating, which, he's rated as the number 1,230 overall prospect in the 2026 class. But I mean, you look at what he's done on the field, and, a lot of recruiting is projection. But then you've got a guy like Noah Laval who is putting that production already on the page at the high school level. As a junior, had 124 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 fumble recoveries, 5 pass deflections, and a blocked punt. So, I mean, he was all over the field there during his junior season last fall and, really proved himself out there. So I think this is a guy whose ranking could continue to rise throughout the year. And like I said, even though he's maybe a little bit undervalued in the recruiting rankings, I think Florida State is looking and projecting what he can do at the college level and feels very confident about how he can fit into that linebacker room. And, I believe that he even said himself after the visit that, Florida State believes that he can play all three linebacker positions in this defense. I mean, this is a versatile guy where you let him get to Tallahassee and then the rest figures itself out. But, got to be excited. And then for him, to join his brother Caleb Laval in Tallahassee, it's kind of been interesting because, you think back to Caleb Lavalley's high school recruitment when he was coming to Florida State and eventually, chose North Carolina over the Seminoles, but he visited FSU a couple times, and his younger brother Noah was there with him on those visits. And then Noah now, develops into a national recruit himself and is recruited by Florida State, and those guys are going to get to reunite in Tallahassee starting next season.
I'm going to say it'd be pretty cool, though, to see both of them on the field in the linebacker unit one day. And that most certainly could happen if those guys, first off, number one, if Caleb can get healthy. I know he was dealing with an injury throughout the spring, so didn't get to see him, but recovering from a foot injury. So hopefully there's some good signs going into fall camp. But that would be obviously the family's goal, is to see both of them out there on the field if things go right. But 124 tackles in his junior season, 8 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 fumble recoveries. I mean, you were mentioning he's all across the field there. 6'1" and 220 pounds. That kind of stood out to me right off the bat. 220
Good
already
size.
as a junior. I mean, that kid's in the weight room a lot, and having his protein shakes, D-Lo.
Yeah, and you see the pictures, he looks like he's carrying that pretty well. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe some room to add a little bit more good size on that frame, once he gets into a college strength and conditioning program at Florida State.
Yep. Hey, guys, if you're hanging out with us and enjoying the show, we got about 50 people here watching on YouTube. If you don't mind, smack that like button down below. We go live at least once a week. And also, too, if you're new, I suggest maybe hitting that subscribe button. Got tons of content. We're going to be all over the place for you on site, at the games, away games this upcoming season for Florida State. So credential coverage. We'll see if we're going to have availability at practices. If not, we'll have press conference stuff coming up here on our YouTube, instant reactions from the first day of fall camp, all the goodies here on our YouTube. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. But if you want, you can easily hit that like button, and we would be deeply appreciative of that. Let's keep moving, though. Florida State on a roll here on the recruiting trail. Florida State landing another 4-star defensive lineman, like D'Lo has been mentioning throughout the show. This time, James Carrington is getting added to this 2026 recruiting class. Nicknamed Tank. Love it. Sign me up. He picks Florida State over Nebraska and Arkansas. He also held some more offers: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Miami, LSU, Oregon, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and USC. Those are some big-time schools right there. Thoughts on this commitment here for Florida State after, recent visit to the Seminoles and able to make that lockdown with Mike, Tony White, and, of course, Terrence Knighton.
Yeah, it kind of felt like this one came a little bit out of nowhere for Florida State. You look at James Carrington, and this is a guy who the Seminoles offered back in 2023. And, that year also marked his last visit to campus. But then recently, Florida State picked it back up with him. Were able to land the official visit. And now, with Terrence Knighton leading the charge instead of Odell in this recruitment, they're bringing him in for the official visit over the weekend. And, it seems like things went well for both parties. And he goes ahead and decides, like you said, to commit to FSU over Nebraska and Arkansas, both programs that he had previously officially visited. And, Terrence Knighton mentioned it as well earlier, but his third defensive line commitment since last Sunday. They're building some real talent there along the defensive interior. And, this one's got to be a little bit sweeter for him as well because he gets the win over his old program in Nebraska. And, James Carrington comes in. This is a guy who very early in his recruitment, was one of the very top prospects in this 2026 class, has dwindled a little bit over the years. And I think some of that's just due to the size, sitting there about 6'2", 240 pounds, maybe not the massive defensive lineman you thought he was going to be a couple of seasons ago. But regardless, I think he's got a high floor coming into Florida State, some interesting attributes that they can try to build around once he does arrive in Tallahassee, and we'll see how it works out for him over the coming years.
Yep. I'm just over here, looking at some things. High school.
What you looking at?
I'm looking over here at my guy Timmy J, just seeing what he was sized at coming out of high school. 6'2", 300. So the weight difference massive, height about the same, but weight size a little bit different than Timmy Jernigan. So I'm trying to advocate for my guy over here,
And
Tank.
I discounted him a little bit. He's 200,
257.
about 257.
Okay, yeah, I got 257 here on the notes. But he also played high school in a lot of different states, correct? Could that also play a role there? And maybe I know the rankings are rankings, and yeah, it is what it is. But it's also great whenever we could put on the thumbnail that a 5-star is being projected to go to Florida State. So we have to do it that way. But he played in played in Georgia, played in Maryland, played in Nevada, and also played in California. So maybe that also plays a role in it. But I do like the stat line here: 14 tackles for loss and 9 sacks. I like that. I like that stat line.
Yeah, and like you said, he's kind of moved all over the place during his high school career. But I mean, at the same time, he's played at some of the top prep programs in the country. St. Francis Academy over there in Maryland, Bishop Gorman in Nevada. Those are 2 very good programs that, I mean, pump out a lot of guys to FBS programs every single year. So, I mean, we'll see how it works out for Carrington, but, another pickup for Florida State, and they're filling out this Tribe 26 class with some other guys who are very highly regarded still on the board.
It's about time we move over to the offensive side and we head into the wide receiver department, where Florida State got some good news with a commitment from Brandon Bennett, a very, very speedy guy, committed to Florida State over Georgia and the Florida Gators. He just came off of an official visit in Tallahassee over the weekend, where Florida State made a very strong and impression. Tim Harris Jr., now Florida State's new wide receivers coach, coming from UCF, and Gus Malzahn. That's his first pledge of the cycle there from him. But he plays at American Heritage, where, of course, former, well, I would say now current DB coach Pat Surtain, but was the former coach there. He's on staff. That also helped, I'm sure, too. And their recruitment, 24 receptions in his junior season, 509 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, 1 kickoff return touchdown, and had 5 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown on September 6th in a game there, and also helped lead American Heritage to a 12-2 record and a state championship. Thoughts on the pickup here for Florida State? Seems like a good one for Tim Harris and having that speedy guy and the wide receiver unit.
Speed, baby. Plenty of it coming to Tallahassee in the form of Brandon Bennett, who, like you noted, chose the Seminoles over Florida and Georgia. And you look at this guy, I mean, he can run. He's got a lot. He's got a lot of speed. Some very good track times during his prep career. Personal best 10.4 in the 100 meter. Also had a 21.06 in the 200 meter. And finished in 7th in the 100 meter dash at the recent Florida high school state and track and field championships a couple of months ago. But man, I mean, I really like this one for Florida State. Obviously, already holding commitments from 4-star wide receiver Ephraim White and 4-star wide receiver Darian Williams, who we'll talk about later in the show as well. And now you add Brandon Bennett into the fold. So already 3 wide receivers pledged into this class, but obviously the first 2 were before Tim Harris Jr. arrived in Tallahassee and started coaching. So this is his first feather in the cap for Tribe 26. And there's some other really talented guys on the board for Florida State. You think about a 5-star guy in Calvin Russell, who is just coming off his official visit to Florida State, and some other ones out there that the Seminoles are trying to get into Tribe 26 as well. But, a really strong starting point for Florida State. And I think Brandon Bennett, is an excellent pickup at this stage of the recruiting cycle, especially when you consider who the Seminoles were able to beat out for his pledge.
6 foot 170 in 2. I'm glad you mentioned his track times. That made me think of real quick, because we didn't have it on the docket, but real quick. Side note, Makai Danzy, we were talking about him on last week's show, about him competing in the national championship in track and field. But due to, I believe, an injury or something he was dealing with, had him have to stay away from competing at the national championship. I believe it was a 400 meter, if I'm correct on that. I believe
it was
or was it 200?
I thought it was the 100, but now you got me tripping.
Now it's all over the place. Now it's everywhere.
I think you're right. I think it was the 400, and then he was also competing in the 4x100 relay.
Yeah. So,
but yeah,
that
the
definitely
Florida State track and field said he suffered a minor injury. Didn't really provide any specifics there, but it happened while he was training for the NCAA championships, and unfortunately, kind of prematurely ended his season. He wasn't able to go out there and compete in Oregon. But at the same time, this doesn't seem like it's going to be something that impacts his football season in any way. So, we'll see how it looks whenever we get to fall camp and Mekhi Danzy's out there continuing that transition to wide receiver.
Man, that kid, I'm really interested in. I feel like we've seen a lot of these speedy guys come through Florida State, and it's just these staffs don't necessarily truly understand how to utilize them. I go back to, I feel like last person, it wasn't really someone that we thought was the speediest, but like Bobo, that was someone that found a lot of production. But like these track guys, I go back always to the Marvin Bracey days too, man. And I was like, God, I'm just like salivating. Or Kermit Whitfield, when they did, and kickoff return and national championship, that kind of just seals the deal on that front. But still, you got to get the ball down the field. You got to have a quarterback that has an arm to be able to hit these guys. I think about how like the Bengals use Jamar Chase. I mean, Jamar Chase is Jamar Chase too. Let's make sure we're putting that out there loud and clear. But when you can have a quarterback there that can match that kind of ridiculous speed there, that's what you love. And that's something maybe Florida State was lacking in and not able to get these guys going. But I'd like to see how Florida State is going to, and Gus Malzahn, work with Mekhi Danzy. And it seems like they're kind of been experimenting already with his position in this spring and moving forward for the Seminoles. And like you said, I don't think it's something too crazy where, we're having to keep an eye on him going into fall camp if he's going to be available or not. But yeah, nice pick up there for Florida State in the wide receiver room. Let's jump over here with some guys that were already committed but have shut down their recruiting visits elsewhere and are sticking with the Seminoles. Let's start off with Darion Williams. Let's just keep on staying in this wide receiver room. A 4-star wide receiver is going to stick with the Noles. He returned to Tallahassee and shut down some chatter about him maybe going elsewhere, but is sticking with Florida State per the Osceola's Nick Carlisle. I hope I didn't. Carlisle. I don't know. It's one of those. Hopefully we'll meet up and we'll be able to get that last name figured out. But he's committed.
Carlisle.
Carlisle. Yeah. Carlisle. Well, where's the S at?
Is there not an S?
There's an S in there. At least
it's silent. It's like the Indiana Pacers coach, Rick Carlisle.
Okay. So it's a quiet one. Okay, got it. Anyways, Darion Williams. He is, and I keep on wanting to say Darion Williamson, so this is so close to that. But Darion Williams has been committed to Florida State since April of 2024, and he is going to stick with the Noles. 18 receptions in his last season, 237 yards, 1 touchdown. He also played on the defensive side of the ball, 9 tackles, 2 interceptions, including 1 pick six. Okay, can do it both ways. 2 punt returns, 3 kickoff returns, including 1 kickoff return touchdown. One of his best performances was whenever he played Sickles back in October and had 110 receiving yards and a touchdown. Also played against Bartow in November and had a pick six and 97-yard kickoff return. 5'11", 165. Small dude right now.
Yeah, I think the size is maybe a little bit of a concern when you're thinking about his projection to the college level, but I mean, either way, this is a guy who's been committed to Florida State for a long time. And, recently there had been some projections for him to wind up in Gainesville. I know UF landed a 4-star wide receiver, Justin Williams, last week. And, that kind of might have taken up Williams' spot in Gainesville if he was trying to make that flip over to the Gators. And, Florida State brought him in for that recent official visit. We're able to do enough to keep him in the class moving forward. So, I think from a perception standpoint, it would have been a bad look if a longtime guy, a guy who had been committed to Florida State for over a year, would have flipped over to Florida. Especially, we talked about FSU landing Brandon Bennett over the Gators, but there have been a couple of recruiting battles that have not gone in Florida State's favor, with the Gators winning out on a few of those over the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. So, I mean, to keep him in the class is good. And like we said, you've got a really strong starting point there with the 3 wide receivers already in Tribe 26. And now you can go out and really try to add an elite guy here before the early signing period.
Along with that, another recruit shut down his recruitment. This was Sean Johnson, a 3-star defensive back, 6'1", 175 pounds. Ranked as the number 45th cornerback and the number 10th recruit in Maryland, according to 247 Sports. So Coach Surtain getting that locked down with was it recent visit?
Yeah, he was also in Tallahassee for an official visit over the weekend.
Okay, so shutting some things down on some revisits, which is always great to see.
Yeah, made that original commitment back in April, and I really like this guy because you think about recruiting and guys make these commitments, and it's just so fickle. A guy can commit and then flip in a week, or even though they've been committed for this amount of time, they're going out and taking 5 or 6 official visits elsewhere. You look at Sean Johnson, committed in April, like I said. Since then, hasn't visited another program unofficially. Didn't take any other official visits in June except to Florida State. Comes to Tallahassee this past weekend, the 13th through the 15th, and shuts down his recruitment at the end of things. And, when someone's committed in the class, I think that's how you operate. So respect to Sean Johnson for that.
There we go. Nice. Let's jump over to a Facebook question here on the live asking, this is from Joshua on Facebook, saying, our defense was so rough against the run in the beginning of the season. The later part of the year, the passing defense was horrible. Do we improve on that side of the ball going into this next season? So we've been talking about him a lot just because there's been a lot of defensive commits, but Tony White comes in from Nebraska, going to run a little bit of a different scheme at 3. And, it just depends. Just depends on what kind of personnel he is going to get, but he does like to have 3 defensive linemen on the ground. And I will say just some things that we were hearing in the scrimmages and such. We'll like to send some guys and blitz on you, which is something that I've always pushed more from whenever Adam Fuller was in Tallahassee. But could this affect, too, if Florida State really just going to rely, I believe, to me, on in the trenches and Florida State's pass rush, which to me, yes, you have James Williams, which is still, there's some question marks there if he can be that 3-down defensive end for you. But also, too, does Darrell Jackson take that next big step? And I know that the question was about pass defense as well, but I think a lot of that relies on what you're doing up front to cause pressure to the quarterback and getting to the backfield. But your thoughts on this question here, D-Lou, now under a new scheme with Tony White?
Yeah, it's ultimately all about the players on the field, but I do think the scheme transition can also benefit Florida State in a positive way, just based off Tony White's history as a defensive coordinator. You look at whenever he arrived at Nebraska, he's significantly improved their ability to defend against the run. And the yards allowed per game went down pretty heavily over the last 2 years compared to some recent seasons for the Cornhuskers. So, I think in the interim, Florida State's defense against the run is certainly going to improve. Now, there were some times where Tony White's defense got taken advantage of in the passing game, and I think that's something that we're going to have to kind of wait and see at Florida State. But at the same time, they went out and added a big piece in the transfer portal and Jeremiah Wilson. They've got some other guys returning in that defensive backfield, Shaheem Brown, Earl Little Jr., the guys that they're also hoping to take the next step, and the Quindarius Joneses and Jabril Rawls, Edwin Joseph. So, there's experience. Yeah, Conrad. There's experience there at the top of the room, and then there's a lot of young talent. So I think if things come together, it's going to be a big resurgence for Florida State. And, it obviously can't get much worse than it was a season ago. So we're certainly going to see some improvements. But the real question is, how much can Florida State bounce back compared to 2024? Can they get that defense, back closer to the top 40, the top 30 in the country? Because if so, they're going to set themselves up, to have a shot at winning, those 7, 8, 9 games that we're talking about Florida State needs to get in 2025.
And to me too, and I think in spring there wasn't a whole ton of crazy positives outside of maybe a few of the really younger defensive back room. But you want to hear more about Quindarius Jones taking those steps. You would like to see where Conrad Hussey makes a better jump than what we saw last year from him in his sophomore slump. To me, what makes you better too, as well, is the competition, the practice on the practice fields. And I would say a couple of years prior, you felt very good about that wide receiver room, and we saw the battles, D-Lou. I mean, practically just get out your popcorn. Me and you would hustle to the corner of that end zone to go watch those one-on-ones in the red zone and see Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman going at it with the defensive back rooms with AZ, Renardo Green, Jarian Jones. I mean, those were some of the most fun practices to be there for. And I mean, now that goes to show how spoiled you and I were now looking at these guys performing in the league and what they're able to do at the top of the professional league. But to me, we just saw a video the other day. I think we put an article out at NoleGameday.com of, Squirrel White. He's out there participating, at least in these, columners out there running around in underwear and everything, but they're out there working along with Deuce Robinson, 2 guys that were limited in the spring, but to see them going, it seems like full speed, it feels like in these videos, is a really good sign to where we're going to see a lot of good on good, hopefully going in this fall camp, which will help that defensive back room. Because like you said, there's a lot of guys that need to see improvement and take those strides, but I do trust in Coach Surtain and what product he'll be putting out there to begin the season. But good question. Let's keep moving, though, throughout this show. Now let's go over to we talked about the good. Let's jump over to a little bit of the bad, but this is a long, long ways away, FSU fans. But this one here is from a 2027 wide receiver, former commit, Cornelius Purdy. He's backed off his pledge to the Seminoles as of Tuesday per On3's Chad Simmons. He has since picked up offers Miami, Louisville, Kansas State, and Maryland. Thoughts on the loss here of a 2027, putting it out there, 2027 wide receiver commit?
Yeah, it's hard for me to sound the alarms too much here. I think I said it back when he committed. I was like, obviously, none of these guys are going to consider other schools during their recruitments. They're locked in with Florida State, nothing to worry about for the next 18 months until they sign. I mean, this is, and I was talking about it earlier in the show. This is just recruiting nowadays. You can commit one day and then decommit another. That's just where we're at in the current age of college football. And I mean, this is certainly a loss for Florida State. A 4-star wide receiver reopening his recruitment, and Cornelius Purdy, one of the top recruits in that 2027 class. Right now, the number 310 overall prospect in his respective class. And, someone who projects to be a solid player at the college level. Obviously, still a lot of time to go at the high school level, only coming off his sophomore season, so his junior and senior year to go. And, this doesn't mean now that he decommitted from Florida State, this doesn't mean like Florida State's completely out of it. I mean, Florida State's still going to be recruiting him, trying to get him back on campus, get him back into that Tribe 27 class eventually, if they're able to. But, we'll just have to see how things are working out. This is a guy who is very young in his development, picking up offers from other schools, and, wants to keep things open and continue looking around. So we'll see if he decides to make his way back to Florida State one day.
Here's another one here that Florida State lost out on, a former commit with Jalen Scott. He has actually flipped from Florida State over to the Auburn Tigers. This happened on Monday. It was hilarious. I saw on Twitter. Remember, this is 2027, everybody. I know, if you want to freak out about it, definitely feel free. It's a free world. At least I still think it is. But definitely on Twitter, it's a free world, because I just saw the tweets flying. I'm tired. I hate Mike Norvell. Mike Norvell sucks. This is awful. It's a 2027, man. We're in 2025, ladies and gentlemen. And like Dustin just said, a lot of things can change. I don't care until pen hits the paper anyways. But Florida State loses here. Jalen Scott flipping from the Noles over to the Tigers. Your thoughts on this one? Got some good stat lines here, but this recruitment is far from over, in my opinion.
I just hate how bad our luck is on this show, because I swear we did the show last Monday. We wrap up, we get off. I walk in the kitchen to make some lunch. I check my phone, and the kid decommits. And I'm like, he couldn't have waited, or he couldn't have done it 15 minutes earlier where
Yeah, live.
we're able to
Come
wrap
on.
this up. Now we're doing it 10 days later. But, this one, not really much of a surprise to me. I mean, Jalen Scott, a 4-star prospect in that 2027 class out of the state of Alabama, and obviously flips to the in-state Auburn Tigers. So not a real big surprise there. I think, it was a little bit shocking whenever he went off the board to Florida State back in January after a junior day visit to Tallahassee. Could have just been the visit high, but he went ahead and opened that commitment to Florida State, was the first member of FSU's Tribe 27 recruiting class. And, obviously they added a couple of guys around him, including Cornelius Purdy, who is no longer in the class either. And Florida State, I mean, did have the number 1 class in 2027. And like we were saying, it was really early when they did, but now go from 4 commitments down to 2. And I believe they're sitting at number 7 in the country as of now. 4-star defensive backs Mekhi Williams and Bryce Williams are the 2 commitments remaining in Tribe 27 for Florida State, and long time to go in this recruiting cycle. It'll become more of a major focus after we get through the 2026 recruiting class with that early signing period in December. But, right now, just hard to, be that concerned about it. It's very early. Lots going to change there, especially with the way recruiting has gone over the last decade or so. Commitments, I mean, just frankly, they don't mean as much anymore.
No, and I'm interested to see the chat. So we've got over 100 of y'all on YouTube and got a handful of y'all on Facebook and a lot of y'all on Twitter as well. Put in the comments or put it in the chat below. What do you think matters the most? High school recruiting now or transfer portal now? You let us know in the comments, or if you're watching afterward and the VOD here on YouTube, drop it down in the comments. Let us know, and we'll bring up that topic on next week's show and give our take on it as well. Let's jump over to the quarterback conversation, then we'll go over to a Jared Verse video that's going viral right now. But Landon Duckworth, a 4-star quarterback that Florida State was targeting pretty heavily, has removed the Seminoles from his top list, D-Lou, and now it seems like for Duckworth, it's down to who we were just talking about, the Auburn Tigers and South Carolina. Where does Florida State look at next in its quarterback room? Because as of right now, this is going to be Thomas Castellanos last year. You got a guy like Kevin Sperry that, showed you some good signs during the spring, but that is a true freshman, ladies and gentlemen. And then also, too, you have Brock Glenn that, to me, I don't feel secured with moving forward with, and that's no knock on him, but it's just reality, and nothing there to me shows me that he can be your future guy at the quarterback position after what we saw last year, even though I know that you and I could have been out there along with the rest of our viewers could have been blocking the same way as what it felt like Florida State's was last year, but still, nonetheless, the quarterback room, you got to bring in a commit this year, and you can't keep relying on the transfer portal. So where does Florida State, Gus Malzahn, Tony Tokars, where does the path lead them now with Duckworth cutting off the Seminoles?
Yeah, the quarterback recruiting has been pretty disappointing for Florida State this year. Obviously, Brady Smigel departed from the class back in January, and Florida State, reopened the board since then, evaluated multiple targets, and shortly after Smigel's decommitment, they offered Duckworth, they offered Houston commit and 5-star quarterback Keyshawn Henderson, they offered 4-star quarterback Bowie Bentley, and now all 3 of those quarterbacks have eliminated Florida State from their recruitment. Like you said, Duckworth down to Auburn and South Carolina, Bentley down to LSU and Oklahoma, and Keyshawn Henderson locking things down with his longtime commitment to Houston. So, I mean, really at this time, Florida State's quarterback hunt is down to 1, and everything really hinges on the Seminoles flipping 4-star quarterback and Oklahoma commitment Jaden O'Neal from his pledge to the Sooners, which, he's held since last summer. And I will say, since then, Oklahoma obviously has made a change at offensive coordinator. And it seems like since that change, the recruiting has shifted a little bit for Jaden O'Neal and Oklahoma. Oklahoma, like I mentioned, has continued to pursue Bowie Bentley despite having Jaden O'Neal in the class. And if Bowie Bentley decides to commit to the Sooners, it feels like it's only a matter of time when for Jaden O'Neal to reopen his recruitment. But, O'Neal coming off his official visit to Tallahassee, actually wrapped things up earlier on Wednesday, just recently departed from Florida State's campus. And I will say, just a short time ago, Noles 247 Zach Blostein went ahead and put in a crystal ball prediction for Florida State to flip O'Neal from Oklahoma. We'll see how it goes. I think the plan is for him to visit Oklahoma this upcoming weekend. That could be maybe to deliver a decommitment in person to the Sooners. But Florida State absolutely, has to get this guy on board. I know some people maybe question the scheme fit a little bit. He's more of a traditional pocket passer, but he's not a statue. He can move a little bit. He's not a Tommy Castellanos. Let's put it like that. He's not a Jordan Travis, but he's still a guy who can get it done with his legs mobility wise. But really his talent as a passer, I think, is something that Florida State is really receptive about and believe that he can fit into what Gus Malzahn wants to do in Tallahassee. So, yeah, Florida State really pushing to get Jaden O'Neal in this Tribe 26 class and to go ahead and secure their quarterback before the end of the summer. And it would be big if they do so, with how things have went on that front so far.
Some great thoughts there from Dustin. Lewis, I want to real quick, got over 100 of y'all watching here on YouTube now. If you're with us, we got 35 likes on the video. We're trying to get to 50 before the end of the show, but definitely appreciate y'all, though, hanging out with us. We go live once a week, and appreciate everybody dropping into the comments and showing some love and some engagement and some likes to the video. It helps us out, gets more FSU fans in here as we gear up for what should be a very interesting season ahead for Florida State. And I'll be honest with you, I'm itching to talk a lot about Thomas Castellanos, how this offense is going to work with Gus Malzahn involved, if this offensive line is going to take the next big step. So right now it's June. We got to talk a lot of recruiting, but as we get closer to fall camp, man, we're going to be deep diving into what this offense is going to look like, which personnel is going to be out there, and if it is going to be improved. It can't get any worse, right, ladies and gentlemen, from last year, that offensive side of the ball. And don't worry, we're going to talk a lot of the defensive side, because I think all of us on here, including Austin, who is recovering from his sickness right now, we feel very highly about that defensive side of the ball, but there's got to be some certain pieces that have to take those next steps in order for it to be, a top 25 defense in the country. Let's finish off this show, D-Lou, with a video that I posted this morning I found, and it is from Teron Armstead, a 5-time Pro Bowl tackle, played for the Saints. Really, really good tackle in the league. He just so recently retired, and he was on a radio show being questioned about some of the biggest reasons, or 3 biggest reasons, why he retired. And Jared Verse, former FSU star, trash talker, chirper, practice energy guy, just full of just ready to dominate. He talked about Jared Verse, and that was his number 1 guy that he mentioned. So I'm going to pull this here up on the screen. I thought this would be something for us to end the show on, D-Lou, since you and I know me, are big fans of this guy. Also had Jared Verse on our show too as well. But here is the quote.
Teron, you talked about, okay, I ain't putting the helmet back on. Okay, no. Give me the top 3 guys' reasons why. Okay, that you've gone up
All
against.
Right. This is a good question.
You ain't putting the helmet back on.
No lie. Okay. I'm going to say number 1, he was a rookie from the Rams. That young boy, Jared Verse.
Yep.
I'm cool. I'm good. I never got to see that man again. I'm all right with I'm okay with that. Never seeing that young man again in my life. Bull Rush different. Dog is different. You know that it's coming. You brace yourself. He's different. Jared Verse is different. He will be a defensive player of the year one of these days.
Wow.
Mark my words.
Wow.
Him.
So that right there is I thought an awesome clip coming from someone, a veteran in the league, Teron Armstead. Calling first off, number 1, Bull Rush. And Dustin, you and I got to see that in practice day 1. Really, though, whenever he put on the pads, or at least shells, and the way that he was dominating practices, we were like, this mother different. This mofo different. And you also saw the vibe that he would bring to practices and everything. But then, too, I think one of the knocks that, projecting going into the league, draft scouts, whatever the hell you want to call them, draft experts. The biggest thing was all he has is the bull rush. All he has is the bull rush. But that bull rush hurts, man, and it sucks for you. And, here's someone that has played in the league for a very long time, facing some of the top talents, which he said also in this interview, Armstead talking about Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson, who was the sack leader last year in the NFL, some of the top dogs in the league like TJ Watt. But to say Jared Verse starting off there, he's tired of it. He don't want any more of that action from the Rams' future superstar.
It's very high praise. And, like you said, it comes from someone who is very established at the NFL level and has obviously went up against, the very best pass rushers in the game throughout his long career. So, man, it says something about Jared Verse, and only coming off that rookie season, but a lot of promise about him and what he could develop into during his respective career. And especially, with Armstead saying that Verse could be a defensive player of the year, man, that's a lot of praise coming from the former New Orleans Saints standout. And Jared Verse, I know people are pointing to those 4.5 sacks that he had as a rookie. Really just seemed like bad luck on his part. It was a recent article from NFL.com. They kind of profiled some of that bad luck that Jared Verse went through last year as a rookie. Trey Hendrickson led the league in sacks. He had 17.5 sacks on 92 pressures for the Cincinnati Bengals. For the Texans, Danielle Hunter had 12 sacks on 90 pressures. For the Cleveland Browns, Myles Garrett had 14 sacks on 84 pressures. And then you have Jared Verse at 4.5 sacks on 76 pressures. So only a sack rate of 5.9%. That was the lowest in the NFL among 72 edge rushers with 250 plus pass rush snaps last season. So I think it's only a matter of time for Verse to begin converting those pressures into sacks and for everything to show up on that stat sheet, because, he really put out some good tape last season, and a couple steps away from finishing those. He would have been at a double-digit sack campaign as a rookie. I think the sky is the limit for both him, Braden Fisk out there on the West Coast with the Rams.
I think I was saying this in one of the shows a couple of weeks ago or last week's show, but, you get paid big time when you're a game changer in the biggest of games, and Jared Verse showed he can do that. He did that in the collegiate level, but he also did that as well in this last year's game against the Eagles. He was the one that showed up for the Rams and gave them a chance in that game. And, just the way that he presents himself is awesome. And he also looks like he's in great shape. I know we put out a video of him working out, and also we talked about on the show of him working out with Aaron Donald, which was awesome. And all the Rams fan base was loving it. And he got humbled by that workout, but he looks like he's put on some size, and really interested to see how his training camp looks going into this next season, because the Rams, I've always thought are a really good team offensively with Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, but defensively, that front seven is really ridiculous. And seeing Braden Fisk go into his next season with the Rams is going to be awesome. So shout out to Jared Verse, getting some love here. And actually, that tweet now is getting shared across all different kinds of verticals of different, team beats and everything, showing their respect to what Jared Verse is bringing in the future. Looks so bright for him as well. So when we're talking about recruiting, let's just talk about Jared Verse, and let's just put up Jared Verse highlights and just throw up this right here in those recruiting visits of Terran Armstead, naming Jared Verse as one of the reasons for him going ahead and calling it a career in the league.
And I will say Jared Verse also, just recently popped up on, I believe it was CBS Sports' top 100 players going into the 2025 season. So,
wow.
That's another very impressive honor. And he was the highest rated former Florida State player on the list going into year two.
That's
I
awesome.
think Derwin and Jalen Ramsey were both on there as well. That might have been the only three guys from Florida State, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Okay. Yeah, still monitoring and seeing where Jalen Ramsey plays in 2025. So something we'll be keeping a close eye on. So you can do that by going over to NoleGameday.com. I got tons of coverage, 8 to 9 articles. D-Lou and the staff absolutely killing it for you guys in the offseason and the dry period, trying to get you guys as much content as possible. But we're also here on YouTube. If you're watching right now, hit that like button. We appreciate y'all a ton of being with us on the show. And then also too, If you're new here or haven't yet, hit that subscribe button below and it will show our videos, or when we go live, it will show those up on your feed. And there should be a little bell that you can click on. If you click that bell, you can also pick to set your alerts to when we do go live or drop a new video as well. So highly suggest using that as we get prepared going into this next season. But that's going to do it for this week's show. Appreciate y'all. Enjoy the rest of y'all's week. Unless anything goes crazy, we won't see you until, I don't really have a date yet, but we're going to have to figure it out. Dustin's going out of town. I'm also going to
I'll be back
on
on Sunday. Don't blame me.
We'll be back at some point. But if something crazy happens, so I don't care about going live as long as I got a margarita in my hand. So I don't mind that. I just also worry about what I'm going to say. So that's what I got to worry about. Everybody, enjoy the rest of y'all's week, and we'll see you next in the next episode. Peace.